Hi everyone, this is an addition I made after the original video. If you would like more context on this, I have made a video on this topic or closely related topic in the past. It is one of my older videos. I guess you could call it sort of a prequel to this. It's from about 4.5 years ago. It goes into a bit more specifics about some of the news of the time and my thoughts on the nature of how problematic some of the practices that the businesses are engaging in are. I will admit it is not quite as refined as this video. I am a bit more open with my emotions in that. I was also almost 5 years younger. It was from July of 2020. So, if you want, you can feel free to view this as a part 2. I will be listing this as part 2, or at least an update. This might become a recurring series over the years on my thoughts on the progression of the decline of mass-produced entertainment globally. But if you want more context, feel free to check out that video. I will leave a link to that video in the description of this video, so if you want, make sure to watch it first. I can even make them into a playlist. I might do that as well, and I very well could make a part 3, 4, 5, depending on my inspiration and depending on the reception I get from these videos. So this can be considered part 2 or an update, but I hope you enjoy. Hi there, my name is Forrest Dudley, otherwise sometimes known as Terrison, and today I'm going to be sharing with you some of my thoughts on the current state of entertainment media and literature to a lesser extent. This is something that I have been, I guess you could say, tracking for several years now, and I thought it was finally appropriate to put down my thoughts and try and organize them into some sort of coherent message so that we could all try and understand what is actually happening to our media, to our entertainment, to our TV shows, to our movies, sometimes even to our books, to a lesser extent possibly, so that we can all get on the same page, because I feel like there's a lot of extremely toxic, unnecessary conflict that is going on, and I want us to, or those of us who are willing to listen, to at least be on the same page about what is actually happening and why the toxicity is feeding what is happening. I actually first started writing this about 2 months ago, when I saw a social media post that was attempting to be woke and inclusive, but made it was basically ratioed in the comments section for being, pandering or whatever. The image was of a group of young Dungeons and Dragons adventurers in a dungeon, with one of them being in a wheelchair. They were mobility impaired, and overall there was very, very little wrong with the image, but it was, as one might expect in this day and age, ratio to there and back, saying, well, This is just toxic inclusivity. No adventuring party would ever have such a liability. Why would you take someone that would just be, a danger or get themselves hurt when they were going into a dungeon facing orcs? All of the usual ableist bullshit that you would expect. But what began as a comment on that Facebook image turned into a bit of a broader realization about the entire culture that has sprung up. So, the picture itself is very good, and it's a very thought-provoking point. And the problem that it's facing is that there are two types of critiques that are going around about this picture and about media. There are two different, I don't want to call them factions, because that sounds way too tribal, but there are two different angles of attack that are being, or critique, one attack and one critique that is being used to challenge. And unfortunately, the media apparatus that is pushing this either is unaware of the different angles, or they are complicit in aiding and abetting it, and I will get into what I mean. In their admittedly admirable attempt to, and their rush to swing the scales away from male, white-centered entertainment, the very short version is that media companies are pushing their agenda so hard that they end up crippling the suspension of disbelief. Now, to be perfectly clear, because in this day and age I feel like assumptions about people are so prevalent that they should be listed as a skill on a D&D character sheet, I am not talking about the crowd that whines about woke movies, okay? I am talking about those of us who are writers, who are readers of fantasy, science fiction, all of those lovable genres, who have legitimate critiques of some of the writing and literary appropriation that is occurring within these various IPs. Okay? Speaking as a lifelong writer, who has been published in a non-profit online capacity to some extent, it is perfectly fine to be as equitable and inclusive as you want to be, depending on the purpose of your writing. When you are creating a story, as a writer, your top priority must always be the story. If you want to include certain themes or demographics, your job is to find a way to do so without compromising the integral purpose of the story. If you manage to do so, then you have succeeded in both your primary and secondary goals of storytelling. Now, there are some stories that are designed and built around the concepts and the foundations of diversity and acceptance. They are the main central plot point, they are the main theme, and they are honestly some of the most beautiful and touching stories I have ever experienced. But, and this does not cancel out what I've said, but when writers bring those goals into a pre-existing setting, such as in the case of the image I saw, D&D in this case, they need to be aware that they are stepping into a sandbox that has pre-existing rules and expectations. That makes writing with a message harder, yes, but not impossible. Remember that this is all about the concept of the suspension of disbelief. You want to capture your readers in the story, make them enthralled with the story. If you put something in the story that is so contrary to what the genre or the time period is supposed to be, or your political messaging, then that rips the reader or the consumer out of the story. They are broken from their pseudo-hypnotic trance, admittedly, to say, oh, wait, this is a message I'm being spoon-fed. This is someone who has a political agenda while writing this, or is trying to push their own agenda with this image or this branding. In the case of the photo of the Dungeons and Dragons team that I had mentioned, the very small critiques that I had with it is that the wheelchair looked mundane. It looked like a probably early 20th century style wheelchair. My problem with it is that would break the continuity of the story. Anyone who has been in a dungeon or on an adventuring path would probably know that the terrain is not conducive to a early 20th century hospital wheelchair. Now, I would assume logically, based on potential stories, that the most likely scenario for that character was that they were not a physically based character. They were either a ranged character or they were a spellcaster. Spellcaster would probably be far more likely because that requires the mind and your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma stats. You could be wizard, sorcerer, cleric, and for the most part still just be almost as successful. You just have to be defended better. Take on various healing roles or support roles. That's perfectly fine. And it's perfectly fine for you to have a mobility assist. Make it fit in the continuity. You put it in a D&D setting? Okay. D&D has wonderful, gnome artificers that have crafted some extraordinary works. So give your wheelchair an ingrained levitation enhancement. Make it a chair that has little gnome accoutrements on it. Make it a chair that would enable the character to be able to traverse the dungeon just as well as anyone else. That type of magic and technology is readily available in the Forgotten Realms and other D&D campaigns. It's there, it's usable, and it's very easy to modify some of the spells for that purpose. So you can have a wheelchair in a dungeon, sure. You just need to make it fit. There's nothing wrong with having inclusivity and acceptance of people with various disabilities. You just need to make it fit. As I said, it's harder, takes a little bit more research, a little bit more creativity to do, but it is very, very possible. Now, let's step back and take a look at the larger image here. It is an increasingly recognized fact that several media corporations have become increasingly carnivorous, buying up smaller studios and IPs and using the name recognition of those IPs to try to increase their own profits while spreading whatever social, cultural, or political agenda they think will benefit them. Let's be perfectly clear about something. This is not being done because they believe in those ideals. This is being done purely because they believe it to be financially beneficial. Corporations do not have cultural beliefs or ideology. What they have is a government-encouraged mandate to increase their profits for their shareholders. And marketing is well over 50% of that battle. I should know, I am on a marketing team. While there may be some smaller independent companies that believe in their statements of idealistic goals, at the higher levels, there is no such thing as a woke corporation. The very nature of their design and the economic framework of our society prevents it. They may have woke employees that they have assigned to be project leads, or they may even get third-party activists that they've hired to spearhead certain initiatives. But to the corporation itself, it is always a numbers game. For them, the math is very straightforward. Which demographic will provide the largest financial benefit? It is as simple as that. That is why you have car companies displaying pride logos on their websites here in the US, though noticeably only during the established celebratory month. But they're conspicuously absent on those sites in places like Saudi Arabia. It's why media companies post different versions of their movie posters in different countries that emphasize different aspects of the movie that they would believe would appeal to that culture. Now, these actions, while cowardly, potentially, are not intrinsically wrong from a marketing point of view. But that's my point. The lens that corporations look through is a marketing and financial one, not an ideological one. So, if we dispense with the notion that more and more corporations are seeing the light and coming over to a more egalitarian way of thinking, what does that say about their actions as it pertains to entertainment, media, and literature? Put simply, they are utilizing pre-existing stories and IPs as vehicles to take advantage of cultural trends in an effort to increase their profits. In the course of doing so, they have purchased these IPs and have used their names and settings to bolster their own campaigns. Because these IPs have been legally purchased, the corporations are free to alter and reform them however they choose, irrespective of what they once were or how revered they were to certain demographics of society. Because the corporations have no respect for either the original materials or indeed even the new initiative that they are attempting, their focus is not to create quality work, but rather to treat these stories as they would any other product during this era of late-stage capitalism. Mass production at the expense of quality. In this case, expensive quality means that not only does the IP suffer, but so too does the campaign that they are pushing. When the messages that they are pushing are connected to such low-quality writing and production, it reinforces a negative sentiment towards the ideals of the campaign. I would try and point out to the corporations that they are hurting their own messages of diversity and egalitarianism by pushing so many people away, before I remind myself that they don't actually care about the message, so my efforts would be wasted. Their goal is to ride this wave for as long as it exists. They don't care about growing it or widening it. If it grows, that's fine with them. If it dies out, that is also fine with them, because they can simply shift their products to appeal to the tastes of the time. The vast majority of these companies would have no compunctions about operating in a society built on authoritarian, theocratic, or even autocratic structures, because their role was always the accumulation of financial and material wealth. They are perfectly content to sell to both sides, much the same way that military contractors and weapons manufacturers do. They have absolutely no morals or ethics guiding them one way or another on any kind of social or ethical issue. They have no dog in this fight, other than to ensure that the dogs keep fighting and they keep benefiting. This is currently being played out in real time. As the United States prepares for a second Republican administration, the heads of various corporations have taken it in turns to initiate changes in their companies in order to maintain their profitable standing. This is done to ensure that they are not targeted by the sanctions and investigations that have been threatened by the incoming administration. They are behaving cowardly, and they are behaving self-servingly. They are behaving exactly as we would expect a corporation to behave. That is, doing their best to protect their profit margins and their obligations to their investors. So, if we now approach this situation with our new understanding and perspective, it puts the future of entertainment media and literature in a far more precarious light. As I said previously, we are in the late stages of capitalism. The gains and increases in consumerism are becoming exponentially larger, and a tipping point of maximum saturation followed by a rapid decline is inevitable. In regards to entertainment media and literature, this means that we are seeing more and more products being pumped out every year with less and less thought or care going into the quality. While there have been some examples of smaller companies or individuals that have taken the time and the passion to create quality products, those are becoming increasingly rare and, in some cases, ostracized. In a world of mass-produced mediocrity, excellence is a threat because it reminds the consumers of what could be and encourages them to expand their expectations. This threatens the status quo and the profits of mega conglomerates, who then quickly work to either slander the alternate product or attempt to employ their business model and absorb the new product into themselves before stripping away its innovation and creativity. I'm quite sure that everyone that's watching or reading this, regardless of what your entertainment passion is, can think of at least one instance of this occurring, whether it be with books, movies, TV shows, or video games. So the question now becomes, what do we do about this? How do we, as individuals or even small groups of writers, combat this unstoppable force that has been provided with nearly unlimited resources? The short answer is that we can't, at least not in the short term. There is nothing that we can do to actively and effectively stop the continued decline, because decades of experience have taught us that any kind of critique or protest will only serve to lump us into the partisan conflicts, no matter how much we try and remain above it. There are only two ways that I can think of to restore what we had, and please, if you know or can think of any others, please share them and let me know, and we can discuss. One is to simply wait it out. Late-stage capitalism is unsustainable by nature, and therefore is a ticking time bomb until an implosion is imminent. As long as we preserve the legacies of the great works and not allow them to be destroyed in the economic, political, and cultural upheaval that will immediately follow such a catalyst, we can rebuild in the wake of destruction. and hopefully bring a form of genuine intellectual reprieve to the people charged with the monumental task of Reconstruction. However, that is an admittedly nihilistic view of our fellow man. We would, in a sense, be abandoning this upcoming generation and not only conceding that we are in a dark age of literature, but actively throwing up our hands and giving up the fight. The other option is to work within the system and to let our actions demonstrate the fullness of our conviction. As I have said before, the only reason that a corporation's business model changes is when they are given a financial incentive to do so. They are swayed by neither pleas nor petitions. In fact, one could argue that they enjoy, inflame, and thrive off of the newest hot controversy that they create, to the point where it is in fact debated as to whether the very act of creating the uproar and debate is now a part of their business model, because it boosts engagement. As they say, all press is good press, right? However, therein lies the key: engagement. In order to keep a fire burning, it needs oxygen to fuel it. In order for controversies to continue, there must be those willing to engage and debate with others in the public square. In order for a product to continue to sell, there needs to be interest in consuming the product, whether or not that consumer has good or bad faith intentions while doing so. The one thing that will make a conglomerate like this stand up and take note is if the engagement drops. This does not mean watching something and giving it a low score. This means not watching, and even further, not engaging in the inflammatory public discourse. We have consistently seen more and more long-reaching results and reactions when this has been done. On occasion, this has even been strong enough to shift business policy, as it is no longer a public space debate that can be fueled off of, but is now actively affecting their profit margins. Although this might be painful for us in the short term to deprive ourselves of the constant media that we've become used to consuming on a weekly or even daily basis, there is a very strong argument here for the long-term gains to outweigh that short-term inconvenience. And it would also serve people to remember that this applies only to the media produced by the titans of the industry. There are thousands upon thousands of hours worth of entertainment content that was made by small groups or by individuals that we can absorb whenever we desire. We need to only ensure that our absorption of the content does not translate into a measurable gain for any corporation or business entity that might use it as a justification to further erode the legacy and literary heritage of the writers and dreamers of tomorrow. So, in closing, although we can possibly affect small changes on the system, we would essentially be only delaying its death. Because, as I said previously, in a late-stage capitalist system, a implosion and collapse is inevitable. At some point, it will happen. I believe in a diversity of tactics. And I believe that there can never be enough backups and preparedness for whatever may happen. So if you want my advice on what you should do both. If you have a genre or an IP that you are particularly passionate about, then take what time you can to dedicate yourself to it. Become a scholar of it. Not just a fan that reads it, but a scholar and fount of wisdom for that topic and for the creators of that topic. Collect the information and the literature on it that you can from the original sources. Keep the treasures of that literature. Even if you may never read that book again, keep it. Because if there's a new generation of it coming, all of the old legacies might just disappear or be forgotten. Because kids nowadays, I guarantee you, the kids who are watching The Acolyte and the Skeleton Crew, they haven't read the New Jedi Order. They haven't read the Thrawn Trilogy. People who are watching The Rings of Power, they haven't read The Children of Hurin. At least not the ones who are current. At least not the consumers that make up the vast majority of the base now. And to be perfectly honest, they're discouraged from doing so. Disney actually went so far as to create a light-hearted ban on the material previous to when it took over the IP. They didn't say you are no longer allowed to read it. They said that the content was no longer legitimate. They decanonized it. And now whenever someone brings it up, they say, well, that's Legends continuity. It doesn't matter. That's not what we're doing. If you want Star Wars now, this is Star Wars now. The Acolyte is Star Wars now. Skeleton Crew is Star Wars now. Last Jedi is Star Wars now. That's actual Star Wars. What was written back then was a relic of the past, and most likely misogynist and racist, so I wouldn't even bother reading that. Keep those books. Keep those legacies alive. There is more that I could say on this topic, but this video is already approaching half an hour. I could go into the specifics about a show like The Rings of Power, and I might very well do that, but I'm not going to spend more than half an hour on this video, because this has already gone longer than I expected. So, at this point, I will simply leave this with a message to future writers and future fans of quality literature and entertainment. I am not saying that you cannot enjoy the content that is coming out. If you enjoy the content that is being produced right now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. You are permitted to enjoy whatever kind of content you want. Whatever floats your creative boat is perfectly acceptable and valid, because each of our creative muscles are different. As you do that, I want you to simply be aware of what is happening. Would that slightly tamper your enjoyment of the material? Only if you let it. Because remember, separating out a writer's product from the writers themselves, or from the bosses that they work for, are extremely important. As writers, we have to be able to make those distinctions. If you make the distinction that you want to boycott something, that's perfectly fine. That is your prerogative. But be sure that the reason that you're boycotting it is strong enough that it is justifiable for you when it's measured up against your writer's integrity, your creative intuition. Don't cut off one despite the other. When the two of them can work in synchronicity, that's all the better. That's all for now. I will most likely post a part 2 at some point. But this has gone on long enough, so I will simply leave it here. This has just been a few thoughts of mine that I've had over the months that I've put down. But until next time, stay safe and preserve our legacy.